Chapters 7 and 8 of the Maxwell Mystery by Carolyn Wells. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 7. A Search for Clues. After breakfast, when Mr. Hunt started to go home, I accompanied him to the gate. Lord Clarence was also with us, and we both urged him not to go. "I think it better that I should," Hunt responded. "Mr. Maxwell objects to seeing a detective about, and I can't blame the poor old man." "I suppose it is a natural feeling," said Lord Clarence. "And, too, if Phillip Maxwell did the shooting in a moment of temporary insanity, then, as Mr. Maxwell says, there is no occasion for detective work. But do you think that is the true explanation of the matter?" "It is a possibility," I said, "though it's a new theory to me. But Phillip was very much upset indeed, deeply troubled for some unknown cause. And I for one do not think that cause was connected with Miss Leslie." "Then why did he shoot her?" demanded Hunt. "He didn't intentionally, but if his mind was unbalanced, who can hold him responsible for his deed?" "That's true," said Hunt. "Well, I suppose it will be all cleared up at the inquest. But since the perpetrator of this murder is not alive, it will doubtless be a mere matter of form." "Where will it be held?" I inquired. "Right here in the house, probably. Today or tomorrow, I should think. As the funeral will be on Thursday, and they can't bury him without a permit." I shuddered at the dreadfulness of it all. Hitherto I had thought an ordinary death and burial sad enough, but how much worse with these attendant circumstances. "Queer, nobody heard the shots," went on Mr. Hunt. "Did nobody hear them?" I exclaimed. "I hadn't thought of that at all." "And yet your questions and opinions in the matter seem to imply a detective bent," said he, glancing at me quizzically. "I do take a great interest in detective work," I replied. "But I feel like Mr. Maxwell in this case. I see no occasion to detect anything beyond what we already know. It seems mysterious, I admit, but we know that one or both of the two victims did the shooting, and truly to me it doesn't much matter which." "It does to me," said Gilbert Crane, who had joined us as we stood by the gate, and had heard my last remark. "Well," said Mr. Hunt, with what seemed to me like brutal cheerfulness, "if Miss Leslie gets well, we'll know all about it. And if she doesn't, we'll never know any more than we do now." "If she fired either ball, she did it accidentally," declared Crane. "Didn't you hear the shots either?" asked the Earl, turning on him suddenly. "No," said Gilbert, "and I can't find any one who did hear them." "But you were first on the scene?" "Yes, so far as I know." "How did you happen to go up to the library just then?" asked Hunt. "I didn't start for the library," said Gilbert slowly. "I was feeling pretty blue and forlorn, and the gay music jarred on me, so I thought I'd go home. I went upstairs for my banjo, which I had left on the upper front balcony in the afternoon." "Was there anyone on the balcony?" said Hunt casually. "I didn't see anybody," said Crane, "though I think I heard voices around the corner. But I didn't notice them. You know the house was full of people." "I can't understand," pursued the Earl thoughtfully, "why nobody heard the shots." "Oh, I don't think that's so strange," returned Crane. "Mr. Maxwell is quite deaf, and Miss Maxwell is slightly so. And as for the young people with the music and dancing, they wouldn't be apt to hear them." "And you came directly downstairs after coming in from the balcony?" went on Hunt. "As I reached the top of the stairs I couldn't help looking toward the library, as I heard no sounds, though I had been told Philip and Mildred were in there. I glanced in, I suppose from sheer curiosity." "Who told you they were in there?" "I did," said I, "or rather I told Mr. Maxwell in Mr. Crane's hearing. I saw them there when I went downstairs. That was, I should think, about half an hour before Mr. Crane gave the alarm." "Can either of you fix the time of these occurrences?" said Mr. Hunt. He was very polite, even deferential in his manner, and I saw no harm in accommodating him. "I can tell you only this," I said. "After I passed the library, where I both heard and saw Philip and Miss Leslie, I went on downstairs and looked into Mr. Maxwell's study. He asked me to sit down. I did not do so, but after a word or two I went on through to the billiard room. I looked at the clock in the study as I passed, and it was exactly 10. I can't say, though, at just what time the general alarm was given. I should think less than a half-hour later." "I can tell you," said Gilbert. "When I concluded to go home, I looked between the portieres into Mr. Maxwell's study, and it was 20 minutes past 10. Mr. Maxwell was nodding over his paper. He is a little deaf, so he probably didn't hear me. At any rate, he didn't look up. Then I went immediately upstairs, and it could not have been more than 2 minutes before I called Dr. Sheldon." "All this is of interest, and I thank you," said Detective Hunt. "Though, as you say, since there is no criminal to discover, there is small use of collecting evidence." "Queer chap, isn't he?" I said to Gilbert as the detective went away. "Yes, but I think he's clever." "I don't. If there were any occasion for detective work on this case, I believe I could give him cards and spades, and then beat him at his own game." "Perhaps you could," said Gilbert, but he spoke without interest. There was plenty for all to do that day. I had expected to return to New York, but both Mr. Maxwell and Miss Miranda begged me to stay with them till after the funeral. As there was no reason for my immediate presence in the city, I was glad to be of service to my good friends. I assisted Mr. Maxwell to write letters to the various relatives, and together we looked over poor Philip's effects. The boy had no business papers to speak of, for he had no money except what was given him by his uncle, and apparently he kept no account of its expenditures. "I paid all his bills," said Mr. Maxwell in explanation of this, "and kept the receipts. I allowed Philip such ready cash as he wanted, and I may say, I never stinted him. Whatever his recent trouble may have been, it could not have arisen from lack of funds." "Unless he had been speculating privately," I suggested. "I can't think so," replied his uncle. "Philip wasn't that sort, and, too, had that been the case, we would surely find papers of some sort to show it." This was true enough, and as Philip's papers consisted entirely of such documents as scented notes addressed in feminine hands, letters from college chums, circulars of outing goods and cigars, and old dance orders, I agreed that there was no indication of financial trouble. Mr. Maxwell was very careful and methodical in his search. In a business-like way he went rapidly through the papers, replacing the contents of each pigeonhole or drawer after rapidly looking them over. He showed no curiosity concerning the social notes or the circulars, but seemed searching for some letter or document that might throw light on Philip's recent despondency. "It was about 2 weeks ago that Philip began to act differently," mused Mr. Maxwell as he scanned the dates on various papers. "But I can find nothing here that would show any reason for it. The poor boy must have had some secret trouble. And doubtless, after all, it was either directly or indirectly concerned with Mildred Leslie." The old gentleman seemed almost relieved that no letters or documents were found that showed a reason for Philip's trouble. And I could understand this, for surely it was better that a love affair should be the explanation, than some secret and perhaps dishonorable reason. The desk we had been searching was in Philip's dressing room, a small room off his bedroom. With the systematic thoroughness that was characteristic of him, Mr. Maxwell opened the drawers of the chiffonnier, and examined the contents of a few small cabinets and boxes that stood about. He even glanced over the crumpled papers that were in the waste-basket, and then declared himself satisfied that we could find no written evidence bearing upon the secret of the boy's recent strange behavior. Mr. Maxwell returned to his study, and I went for a stroll with Irene Gardner. The girl looked so pale and wan that I hoped a brisk walk would do her good. "Do you believe in the accidental theory?" she asked as soon as we were started. "No," I replied. "Philip was too well used to firearms to shoot anybody accidentally, or allow anyone to shoot him. But I now fully believe in Mr. Maxwell's theory that the boy's brain was temporarily affected, and that he shot himself in a moment of insanity." "But if he shot himself first, how did he then shoot Mildred?" "I've puzzled over that, I confess, and I think he shot her first, as I said, not being responsible for his actions. And then, overcome by grief at what he had done, he killed himself in his sudden despair." "Yes," said Irene. "I suppose that must have been the way of it. But granting all that, I don't see how Mildred came to have the pistol in her hand." "Nor I. It is all most mysterious. Let us hope that Mildred will soon recover, and then we will know all." "Mr. King, I suppose you will think very hardly of me, but I have looked at this matter in all lights, and I want to ask you if this isn't a possible case. Mightn't Philip have shot Mildred, and, since she is not very severely wounded, might she not have then snatched the pistol from him, and shot at him in return?" I looked at Miss Gardner in amazement. I felt horrified that she should imagine this, and yet there was a shadow of plausibility in it. "It seems almost impossible," I said slowly, "that a wounded girl could have energy enough to secure a pistol and shoot her assailant. And yet, I admit, I can think of no other way to explain Miss Leslie's repeated expressions of grieved amazement that Philip should have shot her." "You don't think it possible, then, that Mildred may not be as unconscious as she seems, and that she is making this repeated statement for reasons of her own?" "Miss Gardner!" I exclaimed, now thoroughly aroused. "I am surprised at you. Even if you suspect Miss Leslie of absolute crime, pray give the poor girl the benefit of the doubt until she can defend herself, or is beyond all need of defense." "You do me an injustice," said Irene, raising her head haughtily. "My logical mind necessitates the consideration of every possible solution of this puzzle. I look upon Mildred impersonally, merely as one of the actors in a tragic drama." "You have indeed a logical mind," I said coldly, "if you can entirely eliminate the personal element from your estimate of Miss Leslie." "I see no reason why I should not. I judge her fairly and without prejudice. But I fail to see why the ravings of a mind affected by the consequences of an anesthetic should be accepted as unquestioned truth." "On the contrary, the revelations made by a brain just reviving from unconsciousness produced by ether are conceded by all medical authorities invariably to be true statements. Many secrets have been revealed in this way." "That fact is new to me," said Irene thoughtfully, "and it is very interesting. I am always willing to accept authoritative facts, but I decline to accept unproved theories." "At any rate," I ventured, "you have no word of blame for Philip." She turned flashing eyes toward me, and in a moment I realized the situation. She was in the grip of two strong emotions: grief for the man she had loved, and jealousy of her rival. "Never speak of him to me!" she exclaimed. "I claim that much consideration from you." "And you shall certainly receive it," I said gently. "But, on the other hand, let me beg of you not to do an innocent girl an injustice, which your better nature will surely regret later." Irene looked at me. She had never seemed more beautiful, and her wonderful eyes expressed contrition, gratitude, and a deep and hopeless sadness. She held out her hand. "I thank you," she said. "You have saved me from a grave mistake." Still I didn't understand her, but I realized she was beginning to fascinate me in her mysterious way, and I abruptly turned our steps toward home. When we reached Maxwell Chimneys we found Dr. Sheldon and the Whitings with Mr. Maxwell and Miss Miranda in the study. Evidently something had happened. Each one looked excited. Mr. Maxwell was writing rapidly, and Tom Whiting was hastily turning the leaves of the telephone book. "What is it?" I inquired. "Is Mildred—" "No," said Dr. Sheldon. "Miss Leslie is no worse. On the contrary, she is much better. Her mind is entirely cleared, and she talks rationally, though I am not willing she should be questioned much as yet. I am very glad you have come, for there is a new and startling development in the case, and there is much to be done." "What is it?" I asked. "Simply this. Miss Leslie, being perfectly rational, you understand, says that neither she nor Philip fired any shots at all. They were both shot by an intruder who came in at the library window." "But," I exclaimed, "then what did she mean by saying, 'He shot me,' in such a grieved tone?" "She tells us," said Dr. Sheldon, "that those were the last words uttered by Philip as he fell, and that they rang in her brain to the exclusion of all else." That is why she repeated them, parrot-like, during her unconsciousness." "This changes the whole situation," said I, thinking rapidly. "It does," said Mr. Maxwell. "It is now a case for a detective." Then he added in a manly way, "I am sorry I spoke so shortly to Mr. Hunt this morning, and I am ready to tell him so, and to ask him to return and help us." "But what—" I began. "You know all that we do," interrupted the doctor. "If Miss Leslie is questioned further, or in any way excited at present, I will not answer for the consequences. My first duty is to my patient. This afternoon, and in my presence, she may be interviewed by someone who can do it gently and discreetly. Tomorrow, in all probability, she will be quite herself, and may be questioned by a detective, or any one empowered by Mr. Maxwell." And with this we were obliged to be content. 8. The Inquest. The situation was indeed changed. My latent detective instinct was now fully roused, and I determined to do all I could toward solving the mystery. I said as much to Mr. Maxwell, and he thanked me for my sympathy and interest. He also asked whether I thought Mr. Hunt a skilled detective, or whether I advised sending to New York for a more expert man. This annoyed me, for it proved that he considered my services as well meant, but not especially valuable. However, I showed no irritation, and answered simply that I thought Mr. Hunt quite capable of discovering all that could be discovered. "You see," I went on, "we are at a disadvantage, having lost so many hours already. Had we known last night there was an intruder from outside, we could perhaps have caught him. As it is, he has probably made good his escape." "That is true," said Mr. Maxwell with a sigh. "But we must do our best, and leave no stone unturned in our endeavor to find Philip's assailant." Miss Maxwell also agreed to this. "Peter," she said, and her look at me was pathetic, "you will help us, won't you? You loved Philip, I know. And you are clever and intelligent. Can't you help Mr. Hunt, and between you find the villain who murdered our boy?" The usually timid and gentle lady was stirred as I had never seen her, by her righteous indignation. I was touched by her confidence in me, and I assured her that such capability as I possessed should be devoted toward the tracking of the criminal. I determined to go at once to the library, the scene of the crime, and make a thorough search for clues before Mr. Hunt should arrive. All the detective literature I had ever read had taught me that it is next to impossible for a human being to enter a room and go out again without leaving a trace of some sort, though visible only to a trained detective. So to the library I went, and subjected the room and all its contents to a minute and systematic scrutiny. Contrary to all precedent, literary and reportorial, I found nothing. Again I went over the room even more diligently, remembering Sherlock Holmes' wise advice to discriminate carefully between vital and incidental clues. But alas, I could find neither, except the very doubtful one of a small and shiny black spangle, a tiny disc, which might have fallen from the trimmings of some lady's gown. I remembered no one who had worn such a decoration the night before, but then I take little note of ladies' dress. In lieu of anything more interesting, I put the spangle carefully away in my notebook and proceeded with my examinations. All to no purpose. The room had been put in order by the servants that morning, dusted and possibly swept, so it was absurd to look for anything on the floor or furniture. Sighing to think of the opportunities we had lost, I turned my attention to the window by which the intruder must have entered. It was a long French window reaching from floor to ceiling. It was in 3 divisions, each of which was really a door, and opened out on the balcony, which, as I have said, ran around both sides and the front of the house without barrier. The panes were of ground glass, in a diamond pattern, and I knew that at night, with lights inside the room, an outsider might look in through the glass unseen by those within. I opened the middle door, stepped out on the balcony, and endeavored to scrutinize in a scientific way. Signs of a scuffle there certainly were. Just outside the library window in the dust of the balcony, I observed many long sweeping marks that had every appearance of being the tracks of men who scraped their feet around in a wrestle or struggle of some sort. From the shape of these streaks in the dust, I could not gather the size of the shoes that made them, nor the style of their toes. But as even the paint of the balcony floor was scratched by the marks, I felt sure that a tussle of some sort had taken place there. I looked for a continuation of these tracks, but found none, save the scratches that were to be seen everywhere over the balcony floor. As many people had walked there the night before, this was of no importance, but unless someone had danced a clog dance outside the library window, I saw no reason for changing my first conclusion. I found nothing else of note, save 2 more of those little black spangles, one in the outside library blind, and another farther front on the balcony. These I put away with my first one, determined to find out who wore such trimmings the evening before. By this time Mr. Hunt had arrived. The coroner had come too, bringing his jury, for it had been decided to begin the inquest that very afternoon. How strange it seemed, to hold an inquest in Miss Miranda's stately drawing-room. But that was not more strange than realizing that Philip's dead body lay upstairs, and that we had not the faintest idea whose hand wrought this evil. I paused in the library to talk to Mr. Hunt. He was not mysterious and uncommunicative like the regulation detective, but was frankly at his wits' end. When I saw this, and knew that I was similarly unenlightened, I wondered if I had done wisely in advising Mr. Maxwell against getting a man from the city. "Very little to work on, eh, Hunt?" I said. "Just about nothing at all," he said moodily, staring at the carpet. "Look here, Mr. King, who is that foreigner staying here?" "The Earl of Clarendon." "Oh, he's a noble Britisher, all right. Don't try to stir up anything against him." "I'm not. Don't be absurd. But have they known him long?" "When Mr. Alexander Maxwell and Miss Miranda travelled abroad a few years ago, I believe he entertained them in London, or at his country house. He's the real thing, Hunt. Don't get any notions about that." "I can't get any notions anywhere. There's nothing to work on." "But the inquest may bring out some important facts." "I doubt it. If anyone knew anything he would have told it at once. Why shouldn't he? We are all of one interest. The deed was doubtless done by a burglar who was trying to effect an entrance, and who was frightened away by his own shots." "Well," I responded, "I'm willing to suspend judgment until I have something more definite to base my opinions on. Come, let us go downstairs." A crowd had assembled in the lower rooms, for the inquest was in a way a public function. I was sure the Maxwells were terribly annoyed at this invasion of their beautiful home, but I was also sure that such thoughts were swallowed up in their eagerness to discover and punish the murderer of Philip. Mr. Billings was calm and businesslike. He had empaneled his jury and was already examining the first witness. Mr. Maxwell's own lawyer was present, also the district attorney, and several other gentlemen of legal aspect who were strangers to me. The first witness was Gilbert Crane. To my surprise he appeared agitated and ill at ease. In one way this was not astonishing, for as the first one to discover the tragedy his testimony would be of great importance. But he had been so cool and self-possessed all that day that I couldn't understand his present demeanor. "Will you tell us," said the coroner not unkindly, "the circumstances which led to your going to the library last evening?" "I was alone in the billiard room," said Gilbert. "I had been there alone for some time, as I was troubled, and did not care to join the merry crowd in the drawing room. I heard Mr. King come downstairs, go into Mr. Maxwell's study, and talk to him for a few moments. After this I heard Mr. King tell Mr. Maxwell that Phillip Maxwell and Miss Leslie were in the library. After this Mr. King walked through the room I was in, but we said nothing to each other, and he went on to the drawing room. I stayed exactly where I was for some time longer, and then I concluded I would go home. Not wishing to make my adieus to the guests, I thought I would merely say good night to Mr. Maxwell. I lifted the portière and looked into his study, but as he was asleep I thought I wouldn't disturb him, but would just run upstairs for my banjo, and then slip away unnoticed. I went upstairs, and I admit it was curiosity concerning the two people inside that led me to pause and look toward the library door. I heard no sound of voices, so I took another step or two in that direction, and looking, saw Philip's figure stretched on the floor. Then, of course, I went into the room. It has no door, and the portieres were but partly drawn. Seeing what was evidently a serious accident of some sort, I immediately ran downstairs and called Dr. Sheldon to the scene." "So you saw no one else in the room?" No," said Gilbert, but he seemed to hesitate. "You are quite sure?" asked the coroner. "I am positive I saw no one else in the room," said Gilbert, decidedly this time. "Can you fix the time of your going upstairs?" "I can. When I looked into Mr. Maxwell's study, I noticed by his large clock that it was 20 minutes after 10. In less than a minute after that I was upstairs." "That will do," said Mr. Billings, and Gilbert was dismissed. Dr. Sheldon was called next, and testified that he had responded immediately to Mr. Crane's call, and on reaching the library found Philip Maxwell's dead body on the floor, and Miss Leslie wounded and unconscious a few feet away. "She was shot?" asked the coroner. "Yes, shot in the shoulder. She had fallen, and in so doing had hit her temple. This rendered her unconscious. I extracted the ball and found it to be a .38 caliber. The revolver found in Miss Leslie's hand is also .38 caliber." "And has the ball been extracted from Mr. Philip Maxwell's body?" "Yes, that is also a .38 caliber. He was shot through the heart, and must have died instantly." "In your opinion, how long had he been dead, when you examined the body?" "Not long, as the body was still warm. Not more than half an hour at the most." "The pistol found in Miss Leslie's hand, and which is now in my possession," said Mr. Billings, "has 2 empty chambers. In view of Miss Leslie's statement that the shooting was done by a person who came in by the window, it would seem that the intruder might have placed the weapon in Miss Leslie's hand after she was wounded. In your opinion, Dr. Sheldon, would this be possible?" "Possible, yes, but highly improbable, as I myself took the pistol from her hand, and she was holding it in a tight grasp. This would scarcely have been the case had it been thrust into her hand while she lay unconscious." "We will not pursue this line of investigation further until we can hear Miss Leslie's story," said Mr. Billings. "Dr. Sheldon, you are excused." Mr. Maxwell's testimony was merely to the effect that he had spent the evening in the drawing room until about 9:30, at which time he went to his study and remained there, reading and occasionally dozing, until he had been told the dreadful news. He corroborated my statement about looking in on him at 10 o'clock, though he didn't notice the time, and he said that he neither saw nor heard Gilbert Crane look in later. Asked if he had heard any shots, he said he did not, owing doubtless to his deafness, and the fact that he was asleep part of the time. He was excused, and Mr. Billings then inquired if anyone had heard any shots. We who were in the drawing room during the half hour between 10 and 10:30, when the murder was judged to have taken place, declared we heard no shots. And this was but natural, as the library was upstairs and some distance away, and the music was at that time of a noisy variety. Gilbert Crane said he heard no shots, but said that he was so deeply immersed in his own thoughts that he doubted if he would have heard a cannon fired. Then Miss Maxwell's gentle voice was heard saying, "I heard 2 shots, and they were fired at exactly 10 o'clock." "This is most important, madam," said the coroner. "Will you kindly take the witness chair?" Then Miss Miranda testified that she was in her own room preparing for bed. Her doors were closed, and the water was running for her bath, so that she could not hear distinctly, but at 10 o'clock she heard 2 sounds that seemed to her like pistol shots. At the time, however, she hardly thought they were shots, but she opened her hall door and looked out. Seeing nothing unusual and hearing the gay music downstairs, she assumed it was the slamming of doors or some other unimportant noise, and so thought no more of it, until informed of what had happened. "This, then," said Mr. Billings, "fixes the firing of the 2 shots at 10 o'clock. That coincides with your diagnosis, Dr. Sheldon." "Yes, sir," said the doctor. "I went upstairs at about 10:30, and found the body still warm." "It is fortunate that we are able thus to fix the time so accurately," said the coroner, "as it may be helpful in discovering the criminal." Chapter 7 and 8